Okay, let me tell you something about the Ozarks. We can all agree it's one of the most peaceful corners of America. The lakes and Branson shows packed with families, the spring water so clear you see straight to the bottom, and of course, the beautiful green hills rolling across 4 states. But that peace is the exact thing hiding how disturbing it really is. Because near the Merrimack River, an entire Ozark town was wiped off the map and bulldozed into the ground because its roads had been sprayed with poison. And around Springfield, the ground can open without warning and swallow part of a house. So here are 35 facts so disturbing, they'll change the way you see our beloved Ozarks. Let's dive in. 35. The radioactive gas rising up through the floor. In the Missouri Ozarks, the same rock that makes this region beautiful, the granite of the St. Francois Mountains, the limestone that feeds those clear springs, is quietly producing a radioactive gas called radon. You'd assume that in a place this clean, the danger is outside, in the water or the woods. It isn't. It's inside, in the air of the house. As the uranium in the bedrock decays, it releases radon that seeps up through foundation cracks and basement floors and collects in living rooms and bedrooms. The U.S. Geological Survey found that a majority of groundwater samples across the Ozark Plateaus exceeded the proposed federal limit, and radon turns up in every single county in Missouri. It's the leading cause of lung cancer in people who never smoked, killing an estimated 21,000 Americans every year, and Missouri requires no one to test for it before a family moves in. It's in those homes tonight, invisible, odorless, and unmeasured. 34. The town the government finally decided was too poisoned to exist. Picher, in Ottawa County, Oklahoma, sits on the far western edge of the Ozarks. Lead and zinc were struck here in 1913, and within a decade, it was a boomtown of more than 14,000 people. Its mines supplied over half the lead the United States used in World War I. You'd expect a worn-out mining town to simply fade. Picher wasn't allowed to. A century of digging left the ground honeycombed with abandoned shafts, and the surface buried under mountains of toxic waste called chat. A 1994 study found that 34% of the town's children had lead poisoning. In 2006, the Army Corps of Engineers found that 86% of its buildings could collapse into the mines at any time. So the government bought the entire town out. One man refused to go, Gary Linderman, the pharmacist, who kept the Ole Miners Pharmacy open for the few who stayed and called himself the last man standing. When he died in 2015, the population of Picher was 0, but 30 million cubic yards of chat still sit there. On a windy day, the lead dust still lifts off the piles and drifts toward the towns downstream, the ones still very much alive. 33. The gentle float trip that can become a flash flood in under an hour. On the Current River and the Jacks Fork in southern Missouri, and the Buffalo River just across the line in Arkansas, the spring-fed water runs so clear and so calm that the float trip is the Ozarks' signature day out. An inner tube, a cooler, a lazy afternoon. Here's what the brochures leave out. The same karst landscape that keeps the water clear has almost no soil to soak up rain, so a storm miles upstream, one you can't even see from where you put in, can send the river up 10 to 15 feet in less than an hour. In November of 2024, the gauge at acres on the Current River rose from 23 feet to an estimated 32, a new record, and the National Park Service had to pull people off the water. Its own safety page puts it bluntly: if you can't rescue yourself, the river isn't safe for you. The water that looks the calmest is the water that rises the fastest, and it gives almost no warning at all. 32. The ground that can open up and swallow part of a house. On a Sunday morning in August of 2006, in Nixa, Missouri, just south of Springfield, a man named Norman Scrivener was reading the paper when he heard a rumble he first thought was a tornado. It wasn't. A sinkhole had opened underneath his home and swallowed his garage, and the car parked inside it, leaving a hole about 60 feet wide and 75 feet deep. You'd think solid ground is the one thing you can count on. In the Ozarks, you can't. The whole region sits on karst, limestone that water dissolves slowly from below, hollowing out voids until the roof of one gives way and the surface drops, without warning, under roads and yards and homes. Greene County alone has mapped more than 2,500 sinkholes and takes the danger seriously enough to write sinkhole rules into its building code. And the dissolving never stops. Another opened beside a Springfield family's house in 2020. and more appear every rainy season, with no way to know which patch of ground is already hollow underneath. 31. The dam that engineers realized could wipe out Branson, only after they'd already built it. Table Rock Dam sits on the White River in Stone and Taney counties, Missouri, holding back the lake the entire Branson tourism economy is built around. For 40 years, it was considered sound. Then, in the 1990s, the Army Corps of Engineers reran its worst-case flood numbers with better data and found a problem. In a maximum flood, the lake would rise about 10 feet higher than the original design ever assumed, high enough to pour over the earthen section of the dam and tear it apart. The Corps' own documents stated it plainly. That failure would cause catastrophic losses downstream in Branson, a city of around 12,000 residents that draws close to 10 million visitors a year, all of it sitting below the dam. They spent $65 million on an auxiliary spillway in 2005 to fix it, but FEMA still classifies Table Rock as a high-hazard dam, and the Corps still notes that nature, from time to time, exceeds the design. The fix is built. Branson is still downstream. 30. The tick whose bite can take red meat away from you for good. In the oak woods of the Arkansas and Missouri Ozarks lives the Lone Star tick, a small tick with a single white dot on its back. And out here, it's everywhere. You'd think the worst a tick could do is leave you with a few days of fever. This one can rewire your immune system. When it bites, its saliva can carry a sugar called alpha-gal into your blood, a sugar that's in beef, pork, lamb, and venison, but not in humans. Your body learns to treat it as a threat. After that, a single steak can set off an allergic reaction hours later, sometimes severe enough to put you in the hospital. It's called alpha-gal syndrome. There's no cure, and the CDC believes as many as 450,000 Americans may already have it, with Arkansas and Missouri sitting right at the center of the map. Dr. Joshua Kennedy, an allergist in Little Rock, simply calls his state the epicenter, and as the climate warms, the Lone Star tick is spreading north, carrying that one bite, lifelong change into places that have never had to worry about it before. That's fact 30, a little under halfway. Quick thing before we keep going. The comments on these are honestly the best part, and I know a lot of you watching are from these hills, or have family who are. So if you've had alpha-gal, or you know someone who has, drop it down there. I keep hearing how fast it's spreading, and I read every single one. And while you're down there, a friend of mine wants a word.
I have but one humble request, that you like and subscribe. For a channel of the people, by the people, needs good folk like you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, where were we? 29. The river that became one of the most poisoned in the world. In St. Francois County, Missouri, the heart of what's called the Old Lead Belt, the ground was mined for lead from 1864 until 1972. And the leftover waste was piled into mountains beside the big river. You'd think that when the mines closed, the danger closed with them. It didn't. The tailings kept washing into the big river, and research from Missouri State University found its floodplain is now among the most heavily metal contaminated in the entire world. Downstream, in the smelter town of Herculaneum, the lead got into the air and the street dust. Testing in 2001 found street dust that was 30% lead, and more than half of the small children living near the smelter with elevated lead in their blood. The smelter finally closed in 2013, but the tailings still sit at the head of the big river. The floodplain is still contaminated, and lead is the kind of poison that once it gets into a child, never fully leaves. 28. The blind fish that's quietly starving in the dark. In cave streams beneath Missouri, Arkansas, and Oklahoma lives the Ozark cavefish, a small, pale, eyeless fish found nowhere else on Earth. And it's running out of food for a reason almost no one would guess. Here's how a cave works. No sunlight means nothing grows down there, so almost all the food has to come from outside, and most of it arrives as bat droppings. Bats roost in these caves by the thousands, fly out at night to eat insects, and come back to drop guano onto the cave floor. That guano feeds tiny shrimp-like creatures, and those creatures are what the cavefish eats. The whole food chain begins with bats. Now, white nose syndrome is killing those bats off across the Ozarks, and as the bats vanish, the guano stops falling, the small creatures starve, and the cavefish at the top of that chain starves with them. It's already federally endangered, One of its largest known colonies, counted in a Missouri cave in 2004, held just 63 fish, and the same cracked limestone that feeds it pipes farm runoff and sewage straight into its water. A fish that survived in total darkness for millions of years is being starved and poisoned out of existence in a single human lifetime. And when the last one's gone, it's gone everywhere. 27. The crystal clear spring water that fails almost every safety test. In the Ozark country of northwest Arkansas and northeast Oklahoma, the spring water is famous for running clear enough to read a coin off the bottom. You'd naturally assume clear water is clean water. In karst country, that assumption can make you sick. The U.S. Geological Survey has sampled springs across the Ozark Plateaus and found that in some areas, essentially every spring it tested exceeded safe limits for phosphorus, and many carried fecal bacteria traced to the livestock and poultry operations upstream. The limestone filters out the mud and grit, which is exactly why the water looks so pure, but it does almost nothing to remove dissolved nutrients or bacteria. So the water that looks the cleanest can be carrying the most. Thousands of rural Ozark families drink straight from springs and shallow wells fed by this same system. The water is as clear as it has ever been. That was never the thing that could hurt them. 26. The storm with no name that flattened the forests in a single morning. Most people have heard of tornadoes and hurricanes. Far fewer know the word that the Ozarks have learned the hard way: a derecho, a wall of straight-line wind that can run for hundreds of miles without stopping. You'd assume a region this far inland, with no coast, is safe from that kind of weather. The Ozarks are one of the worst places in America for it. On the morning of May 8, 2009, a storm that meteorologists ended up calling a super derecho swept across southern Missouri with an eye like a hurricane's, and winds gusting past 100 miles an hour. In some forests, it snapped or flattened up to 80% of the trees, all pointing the same direction. It tore the broadcast towers down in Joplin and killed people in their cars when the timber came down on the roads. And the U.S. Forest Service says these aren't rare here. A derecho can hit this region as often as 4 times in 3 years. There's no siren that's really for it, and no season you're safe. The next wall of wind is already forming somewhere west of here.
25. The springs that kill even the people who know them best. Missouri calls itself the cave state, with more than 7,300 mapped caves, most of them in the Ozarks. You'd think the danger in a cave is getting lost. The real killers are quieter. Pockets of bad air. Carbon dioxide, where the oxygen should be, can collect in a passage and drop a person unconscious before they realize anything is wrong. And the water-filled spring caves are deadlier still. One peer-reviewed study ranks Missouri among the worst states in the country for caving deaths, with drowning a leading cause. In October of 2022, an experienced diver named Eric Hahn, 27 years old, part of a team mapping Roaring River Spring near Cassville, Missouri, one of the deepest underwater caves in the United States, died 190 feet down when a bad gas mix triggered an oxygen seizure. He knew that cave about as well as anyone alive. It still didn't let him back up, and the danger gives no warning. A cave can flood in minutes from rain falling miles away, sealing the only way out. The cold, clear water that looks the most inviting on a hot day is often the part that has already taken someone. 24. The arsenic that was fed to chickens and ended up in the water. Northwest Arkansas is the heart of America's poultry industry, home to Tyson Foods and tens of millions of chickens raised in the Ozark Hills around Springdale and Rogers. Here's the part that doesn't make the tour. For years, the industry used a feed additive called roxarsone, which contains arsenic, to make birds grow faster and look healthier. The arsenic passed straight through the chickens into their manure, and that manure, by the millions of tons, was spread across Ozark fields as fertilizer. The U.S. Geological Survey calculated that, at the peak, hundreds of pounds of arsenic were being laid onto the watershed every single day. And in karst country, what's on the field doesn't stay on the field. It sinks through the limestone into the same springs and wells people drink from. The additive was finally pulled from the US market around 2011, but arsenic doesn't break down. What soaked into the ground over those decades is still down there, still moving slowly through the rock toward the water. 23. The animal that's born with eyes and then seals them shut as it grows up.
In the caves and springs of the Ozark Plateau, across southern Missouri, northern Arkansas, and northeastern Oklahoma, lives the grotto salamander. And it does something almost nothing else with a backbone does. It's born in surface streams with working eyes and dark skin, like any ordinary young salamander. Then, as it matures and moves down into the permanent dark, its body undoes itself. Its skin loses all color and turns a translucent, ghostly pink. Its eyelids grow over its eyes and fuse shut, until the eyes themselves shrink and sink beneath the skin. The adult lives out its whole life in cold, black water, completely blind. Here's why that should matter to anyone standing above it. The grotto salamander lives in the same groundwater that surfaces as the springs and wells people across the Ozarks drink from, and animals like it are the warning system for that water. When the cave creatures start sickening and disappearing, it's the first sign the aquifer is being poisoned. By the time it reaches the tap, the blind thing in the dark already knew. 22. The deadliest tornado in American history was born in the Ozarks. A little after 1 o'clock on the afternoon of March 18, 1925, a funnel dropped out of the sky in the hills of Shannon County, Missouri, near the small town of Ellington. Its first victim was a farmer named Sam Flowers, killed by a falling tree before most people even knew a storm had formed. That evening, his horse came home without him, and a search party found his body hours later. You'd think a tornado that started in remote Ozark hills would stay a local tragedy. This one became the worst in the country's history. It tore through the mining town of Annapolis, Missouri, flattening 90% of it, then crossed the Mississippi and kept going. One tornado on the ground for 219 miles, 3.5 hours, at times moving faster than 70 miles an hour. By the time it lifted, it had killed 695 people, more than any tornado before or since. It was born in these hills, and the same collision of air that built it still rolls over the Ozarks every spring.
21. The summer the state knew the water was contaminated and let people swim anyway. The Lake of the Ozarks in central Missouri is the state's biggest vacation lake. Millions of visitors a year, beaches packed every summer weekend. In May of 2009, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources tested the water and got alarming results. Some samples held E. coli, bacteria from fecal waste, at up to 19 times the legal limit, with one public beach over the line as early as the 18th of May. You'd assume the state's first move would be to warn people and close the beaches. It did neither. Senior officials, worried about the hit to tourism, sat on the results for about a month, straight through Memorial Day weekend, the busiest of the year. While families kept swimming in water the state already knew was unsafe. When the Kansas City Star broke the story, the governor suspended the agency's director, and an internal review turned up 10 separate times in 3 years that beaches were left open despite high readings. The lake is ringed by more than 15,000 aging septic systems, many failing into the water. They're still there, and the first instinct that summer was to keep it quiet. 20. The dye tests that proved your spring water and the town's sewage can end up in the same place. Underneath the Ozarks runs a hidden plumbing system no one has ever fully mapped. Thousands of miles of cracks and channels dissolved into the limestone. To learn where the water really goes, hydrogeologist Tom Ailey, who has run the Ozark Underground Laboratory in Proto, Missouri for over 50 years, pours harmless fluorescent dye into one spot and waits to see where it surfaces. The results are unsettling. In Eureka Springs, Arkansas, a town built around some 60 springs, Ailey put dye into a city sewer manhole, and it came back out at Sweet Spring, where locals were still filling jugs with what they believed was pure Ozark water. In another trace, dye flushed down toilets in one community surfaced miles away at Bowes Mill Spring on the 11-Point River. Here's why it matters. In karst country, whatever goes into the ground, sewage, fuel, a dumped barrel, can travel for miles by a route nobody can predict and pour, untreated, out of the spring or well someone is drinking from. The clearest looking water can be carrying the last thing you'd ever want to swallow. 19. Remember the blind cavefish from Fact 28? The one starving in the dark because the bats above it are dying? This is the disease killing those bats. Deep in the caves of the Missouri and Arkansas Ozarks, millions of bats are being wiped out by white nose syndrome. You'd think dead cave bats are only a problem for the bats. They're not.
A single bat eats more than half its own body weight in insects every night. The moths and beetles that eat crops, the mosquitoes that carry disease. And one study estimated that America's bats save farmers somewhere between $4 billion and $53 billion a year in pest control they'd otherwise pay for with poison. As the bats die, that bill comes due, and the extra pesticide goes onto the same fields and into the same water you live around. And here's how the disease even got here. White nose is a cold-loving fungus from Europe, where the bats are resistant to it. The leading theory is that around 2006, a single tourist or caver walked through an infected cave in Europe and then visited Howe Caverns, a commercial show cave near Albany, New York, carrying the spores in on their boots or gear. From that one cave, it has spread to more than 40 states and killed off entire colonies, 90% and up, all the way down into the Ozarks. 18. The winter the lights went out for weeks and the trees exploded in the dark. In January of 2007, an ice storm settled over the Springfield area of southwest Missouri and refused to move. You might picture an ice storm as a glittering inconvenience. In the Ozarks, it's one of the deadliest things the sky does. Freezing rain coated every branch and power line in inches of solid ice, so heavy that limbs and whole trees snapped under the weight. And across the region, people lay awake listening to them crack like gunfire in the dark. The ice took down the grid. More than 300,000 homes and businesses lost power, some for 2 weeks or longer in the middle of winter. People died from the cold, from wrecks on glazed roads, and from carbon monoxide running generators and grills indoors to stay warm. The Ozarks sit right in the collision zone between the cold north and the wet south, where these storms recur. The next one isn't a question of if, it's which winter the grid goes down again, and for how long.
17. The night a dropped wrench nearly turned the Ozarks into a nuclear wasteland. Starting in 1963, the Air Force buried 18 Titan II missiles in silos under the Arkansas hills around Damascus in Van Buren County, each one tipped with a 9-megaton hydrogen bomb, the most powerful warhead the United States ever built, roughly 3 times the force of every bomb dropped in the Second World War combined. You'd assume something that dangerous is handled with perfect care. On the evening of September 18, 1980, an airman named David Powell, doing routine maintenance, dropped a socket from his wrench. It fell about 80 feet, bounced, and punched a hole in the missile's fuel tank. Fuel leaked, and the silo filled with explosive vapor for hours. At 3 in the morning, it blew, hurling the 700-ton silo door 200 feet into the air and throwing the live warhead 100 feet across a field. One airman, David Livingston, was killed. The warhead safety devices held, and it did not detonate. If they hadn't, the fallout could have reached the East Coast. They bulldozed the site and buried it under gravel. It's private farmland now, an ordinary Arkansas field that came one failed switch away from being the worst place in American history. 16. The factory farm they let open, 6 miles upstream of America's first national river. The Buffalo River in northern Arkansas was the first stream in the country named a national river, clear, protected, the kind of place families have canoed for generations. Then, in 2013, the state quietly permitted a concentrated hog operation, C&H Hog Farms, at Mount Judea on Big Creek, a tributary just 6 miles upstream of the Buffalo. You'd assume a protected national river is the last place anyone would put a factory farm. Up to 6,500 hogs live there at once, producing more than 2 million gallons of manure and wastewater a year, about as much as the entire city of Harrison, sprayed onto fields sitting on porous karst. In that rock, waste doesn't stay put. It sinks through and races downstream. After years of fights and algae blooms, the state bought the farm out for $6.2 million and closed it in 2020, then banned hog farms in the watershed for good. They saved this river, but the manure already in the ground is still working through the karst, and the same porous rock runs under the whole region, where most of the water has no national river to protect it. 15. The predators that came back to the Ozarks while the state still lists them as gone. Mountain lions, cougars, the big cats that can top 150 pounds, were wiped out of Missouri by about 1927, and on the state's own official records, they are still listed as gone. You'd assume the woods you hike and camp in hold nothing that can hunt a grown adult. The records say otherwise. Since 1994, the Missouri Department of Conservation's Large Carnivore Response Team has confirmed more than 120 mountain lions in the state, and the highest concentration of them is in the southern Ozark counties: Shannon, Texas, and Iron. Most are young males that have walked hundreds of miles from the west, and the state is careful to note there's no confirmed breeding population yet, and that attacks are extremely rare. All of that is true, but a few females have already turned up. The confirmations climb year after year, and an ambush predator built to move unseen is back in the same hills where people let their kids play in the yard at dusk, whether the official map admits it yet or not. 14. For 60 years, the government effectively made it illegal to warn you a tornado was coming. The Ozarks sit in one of the most tornado-prone stretches of the country. We already watched the deadliest tornado in American history begin in these hills. Here's what almost no one knows about those years. You'd assume the government always tried to warn people. For more than half a century, it did the opposite. In 1887, the U.S. Army Signal Corps banned the word tornado from official forecasts, and the Weather Bureau kept that ban for decades, writing it into the rulebook in 1905, 1915, and 1934. Their own 1887 report said the panic from a warning would do more harm than the tornado itself. So forecasters were forbidden the word. They could only say severe local storms. Across those decades, thousands of people, including everyone killed in the 1925 tri-state tornado, died with no warning, because the word that might have sent them to the cellar was against the rules. It wasn't lifted until 1950. The word is allowed now, but the warning still only by minutes. The Ozarks are still one of the most tornado-prone places in America, and every spring, the same storms come for these hills. The only thing that's really changed is that now they're allowed to tell you.
13. One of the most life-filled caves on Earth is being killed by what happens above it. Beneath a hillside in Taney County, Missouri, near Protem, sits Tumbling Creek Cave, home to more than 115 species, the most biologically diverse cave west of the Mississippi. You'd think a sealed cave is a protected world, safe from the surface. It's the opposite. Everything on the land above drains straight into it. The cave's signature animal, the Tumbling Creek cave snail, found nowhere else on the planet, crashed from an estimated 15,000 individuals to fewer than 100 in a few short years, pushed to the brink by sediment and contamination, washing in from cattle, septic systems, and development in the land overhead. Hydrogeologist Tom Ailey, who owns the cave, has spent decades cleaning the surface water just to keep it alive. Here's the part that should land. The same water wiping out that species is the water feeding the springs and wells all around it. The cave is just where the damage shows up first. 12. For years, this was the meth capital of America, and the ones who paid for it were the children. Through the early 2000s, the rural Ozarks of southern Missouri sat at the center of the country's methamphetamine epidemic. Missouri led the nation in meth lab seizures year after year, with labs cooked in farmhouses, trailers, and motel rooms across the region. This one has to be told carefully because it isn't about scenery, it's about people, and the people hit hardest were the kids. Children were found living inside those homes, breathing the toxic fumes the cooking gave off, surrounded by the flammable chemicals and the neglect that came with addiction. In 2004 alone, more than 3,000 children nationwide were found connected to seized meth labs, and welfare agencies across rural America reported a surge of kids pulled from their homes, overwhelming a foster system that the small Ozark counties were never built to handle. When the law finally choked off the pseudoephedrine supply, the home labs faded, but the addiction didn't. It was filled by cheaper imported meth, and, lately, by fentanyl cut into the supply, driving overdose deaths back up. The labs are mostly gone. The children who grew up inside them are not done paying for it. 11. The lake everyone swims in hides something that kills almost everyone it touches. The Lake of the Ozarks in central Missouri draws millions of swimmers, skiers, and boaters every summer. In its warm, slow water lives a single-celled organism called Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba. You'd assume something that lethal would be confined to some far-off tropical swamp. It's here, in the most popular vacation lake in the state. The amoeba lives in warm freshwater and infects people when water is forced up the nose. Water skiing, tubing, diving in. After which it travels to the brain and destroys it. It is almost always fatal. Of the 167 known US cases since 1962, only 4 people have ever survived, and most victims are dead within about 5 days. In August of 2025, a Missouri resident died after water skiing at the Lake of the Ozarks, only the 3rd confirmed case in the state's history, after 1987 and 2022. And the trend is the wrong direction. As climate change warms these lakes and stronger storms wash more organic matter into them, the amoeba's ideal conditions are spreading. The water gets a little warmer every summer, and so does the risk in every lake in the Ozarks. We're into the final 10 now. Everything still ahead is the heaviest of what the Ozarks keep buried, and the deepest, most dangerous thing of all is waiting at number 1. 10. The afternoon a mile-wide tornado erased a third of Joplin. On May 22, 2011, the people of Joplin, Missouri, a city of about 50,000 in the southwestern Ozarks, were going about an ordinary Sunday. You'd think a modern American city with warning sirens can't be destroyed in 20 minutes. Joplin learned otherwise. A little after 5:30, a multiple vortex tornado, nearly a mile wide and rated EF5, the top of the scale, winds over 200 miles an hour, tore straight through the middle of the city. It gutted St. John's Regional Medical Center, a 9-story hospital with patients still inside. It killed 158 people and injured more than 1,000. The deadliest single tornado to strike the United States since modern records began in 1950. Whole neighborhoods were reduced to bare slabs. And Joplin sits exactly where it always has, in the heart of America's tornado country. The sirens are better now. The sky over these hills is exactly as dangerous as it was that afternoon. 9. The disease-carrying invaders the state is racing to wipe out before they take the water. Across the Mark Twain National Forest, 1.5 million acres spread through 29 counties of the Missouri Ozarks, and on through the hills of northern Arkansas, feral hogs are breeding faster than anyone can kill them. You might think a wild pig is just a nuisance for farmers. It's a moving contamination event. Feral hogs root and wallow through stream banks and spring branches, fouling the water with sediment and E. coli, and they carry as many as 45 diseases and parasites, brucellosis, leptospirosis, trichinosis, that can pass to livestock, pets, and people. They tear up the forest floor and eat the eggs and young of native and endangered species. And they breed so fast that Missouri's official goal isn't to manage them, it's to eliminate them entirely. The state even banned hunting them on public land because shooting a group scatters the survivors and makes them far harder to trap and remove. Between the two states, they already do well over $1 billion in damage a year. They're in the same woods you hike and the same water you drink from. And right now, the people fighting them are losing ground. 8. The winter the Ozarks became a death march. In the brutal winter of 1838 and 1839, after the United States forced the Cherokee from their homelands in the southeast, the Cherokee themselves, under their principal chief, John Ross, were made to organize and march their own people west in wagon trains called detachments. One of those, led by a Cherokee conductor named John Benge, crossed straight through the southern Missouri Ozarks. Most of the rest passed near present-day Springfield and Rolla. You might picture the Trail of Tears as something that happened somewhere else. A great deal of the dying happened right here. Around 16,000 Cherokee were removed, and an estimated 4,000 died on the way, of cold, hunger, exposure, and disease. In December of 1838, a newspaper in Jackson, Missouri recorded 1,900 Cherokee passing through town in a single week. Most of them, it wrote, poor and exceedingly weak. They were driven across these frozen rivers and ridges under armed guard, past the people who would inherit their land.
The roads they died along are still here, most of them unmarked. People drive them every day without knowing they're following a trail of graves. 7. The Ozark base where the Army keeps real nerve gas and left poison in the water. Outside Waynesville, in Pulaski County, Missouri, sits Fort Leonard Wood. You'd assume the military trains for chemical attacks with simulations and stand-ins. Here, they use the real thing. The base runs the only facility in the United States where soldiers train in sealed rooms filled with live nerve agents, sarin and VX, two of the deadliest substances ever made, where a single drop of VX can kill in minutes. That's the part they advertise. Here's the part they don't. For decades, the base's firefighters drilled with a foam loaded with PFAS, the forever chemicals that never break down, and it's soaked into the ground. Fort Leonard Wood sits on Ozark karst, riddled with sinkholes and caves, and draws almost all of its water from the Big Piney River running right through it. PFAS has turned up in the groundwater and drinking water there. The same chemicals now linked to kidney and testicular cancer, thyroid disease, and developmental harm. And veterans who served at the base are filing toxic exposure claims over exactly that. The nerve agents are real, and they're on that base today. And the poison already in the water doesn't break down, and it doesn't leave. 6. The Ozarks were the most lawless killing ground of the Civil War. Most people picture the war's battles far to the east. But on August 10, 1861, one of the first major battles west of the Mississippi was fought at Wilson's Creek, just outside Springfield, Missouri. And the Union commander, General Nathaniel Lyon, was shot dead on the field. The first Union general killed in the entire war. You'd think the battle was the worst of it. The battle was the easy part. What followed across the Ozarks was years of guerrilla war, neighbor against neighbor. No uniforms, no front lines, no rules. With the able-bodied men away fighting, bands of bushwhackers preyed on the women, children, and old men left behind. The most feared of them, Alf Bolin, hid his gang behind a cluster of boulders south of Forsyth, still called the Murder Rocks, robbing and killing travelers on the road. By some accounts, dozens of them, until a Union trap finally caught him in 1863. They cut off his head and stuck it on a pole in the town square at Ozark. The shooting stopped in 1865. But in these isolated hollows, a grudge doesn't end. It gets handed down. The bitterness that war planted surfaced again a generation later wearing masks. And some of those family lines have not spoken to this day. 5. The night a mountaintop reservoir emptied onto a sleeping family. High on Prophet Mountain in Reynolds County, Missouri, sat the upper reservoir of the Tom Sauk power plant. 1.5 billion gallons of water held on top of a mountain in the St. Francois Range. You'd assume something holding that much water above a state park is watched every second. Just after 5 in the morning on December 14, 2005, it wasn't. The gauges meant to warn operators the reservoir was full had failed. The pumps kept running, the water poured over the wall, and a 600-foot section of the dam gave way. 1.3 billion gallons came down the mountain in minutes, stripping the slope to bare rock and tearing through Johnson's Shut-ins State Park. The only home in its path belonged to Park Superintendent Jerry Toops, his wife Lisa, and their 3 children, including a 7-month-old. The water tore the house apart and swept all 5 of them a quarter mile into a field. By something close to a miracle, every one of them lived. They rebuilt it, stronger than before, but the job never changed. Every single night, the pumps still send 1.5 billion gallons back up that mountain and hold them there, in the dark, directly above the valley. The reservoir that broke in 2005 had just won an award for its design. It was considered perfectly safe. Right up until the pre-dawn morning, it wasn't. That water is up there tonight. And these hills are full of dams holding back rivers above the towns that trust them. 4. The masked mob that lynched its way across the Branson Hills. Today, Branson, Missouri is wholesome family entertainment. Music shows, theme parks, lake resorts, all in Taney County. You'd never guess what those same hills were a century and a half ago. In the 1880s,
Taney and Christian counties were ruled by the Bald Knobbers, a vigilante movement that started in 1883, named for the bald hilltops where they gathered, and grew into hundreds of masked night riders in black-horned hoods. They began by hunting outlaws in a county that had seen dozens of murders and not one conviction. They ended as the terror itself, whipping and driving out families, lynching and shooting their own neighbors. They dragged the Taylor brothers out of the county jail and hanged them. They ambushed and killed William Edens and Charles Green in their cabin. 3 bald knobbers were finally hanged on the Ozark town square in 1889. The drops so botched, the deaths were slow. Here's the part that should sit with you. Those same masks are a Branson stage act now. Performers in the hoods of a lynch mob, burning a cabin on stage every night. The real history sanded into a family show. 3. The Ozark town the government erased because the dirt was poison. Along the Merrimack River near Eureka, at the eastern edge of the Ozarks, there used to be a town called Times Beach, Missouri. About 2,000 people, a working-class river community. You'd assume a whole American town can't just vanish. This one did. In the early 1970s, the town paid a waste hauler named Russell Bliss to spray its dirt roads with oil to hold the dust down. What no one knew was that the oil was cut with chemical waste laced with dioxin, one of the most toxic substances ever studied. For years, children played in roads soaked with it. After the contamination was found and a 1982 flood spread it further, the government made the call. The town could not be saved. Every resident was bought out, the buildings were demolished, and the contaminated dirt was dug up and burned. Times Beach was struck off the map. It's a quiet roadside park now with no trace of the town, and the same poisoned oil was sprayed at other sites across rural Missouri, not all of which were ever fully found. 2. Under the Ozarks' prettiest lakes are the towns they drowned. The Great Lakes of the Ozarks, Lake of the Ozarks, Table Rock, Bull Shoals, Norfolk, pull millions of vacationers to their clear water and shoreline resorts. You'd assume those lakes were always there. Every one of them is man-made, and beneath several of them lie the towns that were flooded to build them. When Bagnell Dam closed in 1931 and filled the Lake of the Ozarks, it drowned Lynn Creek, the county seat, evicting its residents and burying homes, stores, and graves under the rising water. The same thing repeated across the region as dam after dam went up. Whole communities condemned, bought out, and submerged so the cities downstream could have power and the tourists could have a shoreline. People alive today still remember the houses their families left behind. In a hard drought, when the water falls, old foundations and roadbeds rise back into the daylight. The lake you're boating on is a roof over someone's hometown, and the water never gave it back. 1. Everything the Ozarks hide is sitting on a fault that is overdue to destroy them. We end where the dread begins, with the ground itself. Along the eastern edge of the Ozarks, where the highlands fall toward the Mississippi, runs the New Madrid seismic zone, a buried scar called the Reelfoot Rift, a place where the North American continent tried to rip itself in half about 500 million years ago and failed. It never fully healed. You'd assume the Ozarks, far from any coast or famous fault line, are safe from earthquakes. They sit over the most dangerous seismic zone east of the Rocky Mountains. In the winter of 1811 and 1812, this fault threw 3 earthquakes estimated between magnitude 7 and 8 in the span of 2 months. They rang church bells in Boston, 1,000 miles away, knocked down chimneys in Cincinnati, and for a time made the Mississippi River appear to run backwards. Almost no one lived here then, so almost no one died. The only reason it isn't remembered as the worst disaster in American history. Today, more than 11 million people live within the zone. The U.S. Geological Survey puts the odds of a magnitude 6 or greater here at 25 to 40% in the next 50 years. FEMA has modeled a repeat of 1811, roughly 86,000 dead and injured, more than 7 million people displaced, 700,000 buildings destroyed, over $300 billion gone, the single costliest natural disaster in the country's history. The fault has been quiet for 200 years. Quiet is not the same as safe. On a fault like this, quiet is just the sound the ground makes while it waits. Every poisoned river, every drowned town, Every buried danger in these hills sits on top of that, and the Ozarks have simply been living, this whole time, in the long pause before it moves again. After these 35 disturbing facts about the Ozarks, which one unsettled you the most? Drop it in the comments. If this rattled you, watch Yellowstone is hiding something deeply disturbing, and California is hiding something deeply disturbing next. Subscribe and like to keep exploring the hidden side of America. See you in the next one.